Welcome back, everybody. In this video, we're going to discuss arrays. And like you've seen last week on the previous videos, arrays can be one-dimensional. However, in this video, we're going to discuss the two-dimensional arrays. All right. The concept is like the array comes in the form of a grid, like you have here. So you have rows and you have columns. I'm going to make reference to Python. It's like the list of lists in Python. All right. And because arrays are zero indexed in C#, so you're looking at something like this for a 2x2 array. So arrays always come with a number of rows and a number of columns. So here in this example, which I've just sketched using Excel so that you can get a mental picture, this is similar to how arrays are stored in the memory of the computer. So you have this, it's a 2x2 array, and there are two. The reason why we call it 2x2 is that there are two rows, which is row 1, row 2, and there are two columns, column 1 and column 2. So if I need to store something into this position in my array, I'm going to have to refer to the name of this array and say position 0, 0. That is the position, this position in the array. That means row 0, column 0. This is row 0, column 1, row 1, column 0, row 1, column 1. So the question is, how about if it's a 3x3 array? So this is another two-dimensional array because it's two-dimensional because there's rows and columns. And in this case, this is a 3x3. And as you can see, by default, you have 3 rows, row 0, row 1, row 2. You have 3 columns, column 0, column 1, and column 2. And the last item in this array will be in position 2, 2. So that's basically it. Let's see how we can program this. Before we get started, because there are rows and columns, as you can see, if I use a variable called okay, I'm typing in Excel now, so it's kind of tricky. Equals, if I want to represent the rows, you can see row is changing from 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. And every time row is changing, the column has to be 0 3 times, and the column changes to 1 3 times, and the column changes to 2 3 times. So it's a no-brainer, given the algorithms we've dealt with before, that this can be going through this array or storing stuff and everything in this array can be done if I have a loop of I that goes from 1 to 2, from 0 to 2, 0 to 2. And inside that loop, I need another loop of, say, another j that then goes from 0 to 2. All right, but we're going to see how this thing works in action. Okay, so we are here. I just have some code sketches here. Here is a simple 2x2 array. So how do you declare an array here when it's 2x2? You put a comma in between the square brackets to indicate that it's a 2x2 array. Give it any name you want. Your array could be A, it could be numbers, it could be B, it could be C. Then you indicate that it's a new array and you dimension it. You specify the dimension of the array. In previous weeks, we've seen how we can just enumerate the things in the array. So in this case, you're dimensioning the array. If I know what's going to go in this array before now, I'll just enumerate the items in the array. But since I do not know, then I'd rather just create a new array, then I can store stuff in it. So here are two loops, like I just explained now, for storing things inside this array. All right. So I will have to go from 0 to the length of the array. Because this is a 2x2 array, I go to the length of 1. Sometimes you find yourself not knowing the length of the array, so you might have to go, instead of to 1, you might have to go to a dot length. So there are properties to check the length of an array. All right, but we'll come to that at some point. So I'll go to 1, then I'll increment I if I go j. So when I say I comma j, the first time I'm referring to row 0, column 0, like we saw in our mentor picture. Row 0, column 0. All right. Now when this loop goes round, I is going to become 1. All right. So if j would be incremented, not I would be incremented on the outer loop, but in the inner loop, it's going to be j. So when j goes to 1, then I is still 0, so it's going to be 0, 1. So you can see that 0, 1. Because this loop is complete, so it's going to go to the outer loop, and I can then be incremented to 1. Then this loop starts all over again. So I'm going to get 1, 0, and again you can see that's 1, 0, and finally this is incremented to 1. J goes to 1. I'm going to get 1, 1, and then I get that 1. So traditionally speaking, a nested loop allows us to iterate through a two-dimensional array, because the nature of this arrays is such that when you start with an outer loop and an inner loop, it allows you to traverse every position in that array. So that's it. Here's a simple example where this array does a simple job of going through every position in the array if the array is new. But what we want to store in this case, we want to store the addition of the two indexes. Meaning that if I am in this box, I want to store 0. If I'm here, I want to store 1. If I'm here, I want to store 1, and if I'm here, I want to store 2. So how do I program that? So here we've done that by saying in this nested loop, a of I comma j should be equal to I plus j. When this loop is done, we're going to have a, which is our two-dimensional array containing the sum of the indexes of I and j. But it would be nice to display it and see how this thing is. So we could have another nested loop to traverse. Traverse means step through. So traverse means you want to go through the array. All right. To traverse, this time around I can use k and j, or k and m, so that I don't repeat my iterator. In C#, however, if you repeat your iterators, it still works fine. So I'm going to have k and m. All right. So what I want to do here is to display the items in that array. All right, the items are already there. So, and you know how to display, use console.writeLine to display. Now I'm going to say a of k comma m. And that's it. However, if I'm interested in displaying like this and next line like that, it means when j is changing, you can see j is changing here from 0, j is changing here to 1. So when the inner loop is changing, I use write. However, when the inner loop is done, then I'll use writeLine, so that the next things can appear on the next line. So inner loop here, I'll say write here. But when the outer loop is done, console.writeLine, and I'll just put writeLine here so it moves to the next line. Another thing I may want to do is to just put a space after I have displayed a value, so that the values don't come looking all choked up. All right, good. We look like we're done. We have the array declared. Our program doesn't need an input. We stepped through our array. We had the sum of two indexes to our two-dimensional array, and then we step through again, and then so that we can display the array. So let's see what we get. All right, so it's running, and it's running well. So as you can see, just the way I explained it, this is index 0, 0, it gives us that. Index 0, 1 gives us 1, and then the index 1, 1 gives us that. So everything works perfectly well. All right, so I'm just going to look at, let's say, one problem before we continue. So here is an example of when you might not know your array is 2, 2. Then you have to ask the user, what is the length of your array, what is the number of rows, and what's the number of columns. So you're going to ask those two questions, and then you create your array like this. Similar to how we created our arrays, just that in this case, the dimension is actually a variable and not a constant number. So you can call your array matrix. Generally, in an aspect of mathematics called linear algebra, two-dimensional arrays are literally, they are referred to as matrices. So not the movie Matrix, just matrices. So yeah, so you can read in an array like this, dimension it like this, and then do whatever you want with it. Let's see. Okay, so the next video we'll look at some more exercises around arrays, and we'll look at, then we'll move to methods. See you on the other side. Boom.